Hello, everybody. My name is Prakriti Manyar, and I'm the founder of Purple Pencil Project, a platform for Indian stories, languages, literature, and everything in the world of Indian culture. Today, I'm talking to Prasanta, who is leading Project Vaani, one of the most fascinating things I've discovered in the last month, and I'm sorry that it was not discovered earlier. It's essentially, as I understand it, and Prasanta will talk to us more about it as we go along, is that it's a data collection exercise to capture the spoken linguistic diversity of the languages of India. Thank you so much for making the time, Prashanta. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Pragati?
Awesome. I want to get started right away, but also not with Project One, more about first your relationship itself with languages, your mother languages, and the world of languages as you experienced it, and how that kind of fed into the launch and conceptualization of Project One itself.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to share these experiences. So, talking about the initiation of this project, Vani, I'd like to start back when I started working in the area of speech. That was in 2004 when I joined as a master's student at IISc. Since then, I've been working in the area of speech. And speech has been always fascinating from the point of view of it being a signal to an engineer, it being a signal to another human, because it's used for human-to-human communication. And it becomes more fascinating when we see the variety and the changes that it takes, different forms, when it goes from one language to another. And in its journey from one language to another, it's like just changing one color to another. So there's a continuum of colors in between. So as I've been working in speech, I realized, particularly from my working experience from the set of population who suffer from neurodegenerative disease, that I'm working with doctors from NIMHANS in Bangalore, that people speak in their own language. And that language may have an official name, may not have an official name. So it's very important that we capture the language the way it is there out in the society, in the community, in the country, right? And in India, as you know, it's a country of 1,000 languages, and there is no real boundaries between these languages. The challenge was, if we have to build technology for every individual in the country, particularly based on voice, how do we approach this problem? And that's where I think Vaani comes in. Although I must say that Vaani is following two other projects that I also have been leading. One is called Respin, where we made an attempt to record from 9 languages and its dialectal varieties. And that gave me even more firm belief that we really cannot record languages with their names as is. So we cannot go to a person and say, speak in Awadhi, right? So these two projects, this Respin and the other one is called Sispin. And both are the projects that IISc is leading, me being the PI. And from the learnings of these two projects, what I have realized is that this recording of speech to capture language should be very, very natural, not imposed. So in Vaani, the principle with which we started is to let people speak in the language of their choice, the way they speak at home, they are most fluent at, right? And also in Vaani, if you may have realized that the recordings are happening on image description task, where people have all the freedom to explain whatever they want to in whatever way they want, right? So that's the difference compared to any other initiative for data collection in speech compared to those in Vaani.
Thank you. What is CISPIN? I just wanted to.
So RESPIN stands for Recognizing Speech in India Languages. CISPIN stands for Synthesizing Speech in India Languages.
Wow. I really like what you said about language may or may not have an official name, but people are going to speak in the language of their choice. Like that's so um because I come from the world of written language and more like structured language as represented in say poetry or literature, even linguistics. I think this is kind of a complete switch up and look at language from the opposite side. I really like what he said about that. Um, it's been how many 8 years to Project Vaani? I missed the number when we
No,
started it.
Project Vaani started in October 2022. So it's exactly 2 years.
Only 2 years, and you'll have done like so much recording, etc. And you'll have built this interface in which you can, get people can contribute their own recordings. Can you talk to us a little about the interface and how people can contribute as well?
Excellent. See, the way the recordings in Vaani happens, particularly we have now completed phase 1 of Vaani, where we have reached out to 80 districts with a target of 200 hours from each district and roughly a target of 800 to 1,000 people in every district. So let's take one district and let me explain how we get recordings from these 800 to 1,000 people. So the way we do this recording is through data collection agencies. So they are the primary contact point for us. So what we explain them is how they should collect data, what kind of data, what are do's and don'ts, and when they deliver, what are all the required steps they should take before they deliver data to us. So that is explained in great detail over multiple training sessions and instruction manual and guidelines, right? Now, what these data collection agencies do, they build their own application, and that is proprietary, where they incorporate all these features that IISc would need as a deliverable from them. And then they do advertising, marketing in these districts, wherever they have to collect data, reach out to people, and they have to ensure that at least 800 to 1,000 people in as much as possible age and gender balanced manner contribute speech. And there are also restrictions on one person cannot really speak much, right? So let's say on an average 15 minutes. So that 200 hours gives around 800, comes from 800 speakers, right? So the collection mechanism is completely controlled by these agencies. But of course, I must mention that we have a big say in what they can do in those interfaces and we don't, right? They give demo to us, we approve, and then only they can go ahead and do it. One important aspect here is what is called user consent. Right? So before user speaks or gives their voice contribution, they have to give a consent that they're ready to give their voice for research development and technology development. So that's the operational matter, right? So if someone, let's say from any district that we are running now in phase 2, would like to contribute in Project Vaani, they can, of course, write to me directly or write to the team. And we'll connect them to these agencies who are collecting data, and they will be in touch with them directly. And for these recordings are, of course, not voluntary; they are paid. So we expect for a good quality recording, we believe that a paid task will give us better quality.
I mean, how many agencies do you all work with at the ballpark number? Because later later in the conversation, what I really wanted to reflect on was the need to collaborate at scale for such a project and what, project owners or even people who have an idea about conducting any kind of research, any kind of launching a project. I think collaboration is so different. The scale at which something like this needs to work at, right? So can you talk to us about how difficult it is to probably also work with so many stakeholders at once, including Art Park and Google, and there's so many people involved. And as PI, how much of a headache is that for you, and how much of a load it is that for your work?
Yeah, so I think it's I'll not say it's a headache, it's a load of joy because I love doing this. So let me just give you an idea. When you asked how many agencies we are working with, see, when we talk about interfacing with IISc, there are very few vendors or agencies. However, when they execute these operations in individual districts, they cannot directly reach out to every each of these 1,000 speakers. That's very difficult. So they have to finally go down and find out agencies. Let me call them sub agencies in the district. So IISc to agency to sub agencies. And these sub agencies in turn find the coordinator, volunteers, and finally the speakers, right? So I think in a sense, I even do not know the exact number of such organizations that are involved in this, right, directly. Now, bringing Art Park in the picture, the way Art Park plays a very important key role is that when these agencies and sub-agencies finally deliver the data to IISc through this final point of contact agencies, we need to ensure that the data that they deliver is of the quality and quantity they are expected to deliver, right? And imagine if you watch a movie of 2 hours, and you're watching a movie, it's not that it's a boring set of sentences that you're listening, it's with picture. Think of watching a movie without the video part of it, just the audio. Imagine how cognitively you'll be loaded, right? Now imagine some vendor has delivered 200 hours of audio from a district, and we have to ensure that every single audio is accurate. When I say accurate, what does it mean? It means that every single audio has a relation with the image it was spoken against. It does not have too much of noise that it is very difficult to understand. It does not have two people speaking in it. It does not have any personal identifiable information in it. It must not have any abusive word. And this list goes on to 40, 50 of them, right? And some of these are easy to check. Some of these are very difficult to check. Some of these can be done in an automated manner. Some of these has to have human in the loop. So where Artwork comes and plays an important role is to bring a human, a team of individuals from these districts again, which is an in-house team that manually checks some of the files that programmatically or automatically we are not confident about their quality, right? So in the quality check that we do at IISc and at PERC has two components, automated and manual. And in the manual check is where ARTPERC comes and plays a very important role.
Just thinking about the kind of granular level, data that's collected and that operational chain, I think that's kind of overwhelming almost. But okay, this is done, right? Like you have a system, a logistical system in which data is collected, previously data sets are created, you have your phase one complete. What happens with this data? Yes, you said one of them is a health application, right? But I'm sure that now that all of this material is in front of you, there's a lot of potential for use cases at the intersection of language and technology and so many other things, even possibly building maybe data sets and language models for artificial intelligence, which in the Indian language space is a little rusty, I will say right now. But what is happening to this data set, not just from your end, but also like potential applications that say someone like me, if I'm sitting here, I can see that those data sets are all downloadable. What are the ways in which this can now be put to use and magnify its impact?
That's a great question. This data set has potential of various kinds. And I must add, which I did not so far, is that 10% of these recordings are transcribed. So for example, in a district, if we record 200 hours of audio speech, 20 hours of audio is transcribed, meaning somebody listened and manually typed what is spoken in that audio. Now, in speech technology development, there are various kinds of data sets that are required. One is what we call a foundational model, where we build models on which several specific applications can be built. For example, we'd like to build a model which absorbs all the speech variabilities of various Indian languages and its dialectal variety. If you have to do that, this data set is of great use because without this data set, what you would have had so far would be restricted to maybe recordings from TV shows, which are probably metro driven, right? Metro city driven, or even not from interior parts of the country, right? Think of a district, if I say, let's say, Sarguja, right, in Chhattisgarh. To imagine that we have 200 hours from there, to my knowledge, there was nothing that is available currently, digitally before this 200 hours, right? So this will help us capture the nature and the accent and the variety and variability from Sarguja. That can go in this foundation model, which can now be aware of these variabilities. When you build technology, it will be robust to those accent and variations. Then number two, now in Sarguja, we have, let's say, 20 hours of transcribed speech. These 20 hours of transcribed speech will be now helpful to build a technology, what is called speech recognizer, right? Or automatic speech recognizer, where we'd like to have someone from Sarguja speaking, and the machine will be able to transcribe that automatically into text in no time, right? So it's called speech to text. So that will be the next application that will be used for. Now imagine we have, in this corpus, we have image, right? So we have multimodality in this. Think of now building an application where we present image and we want the computer to speak out or describe that image in any language in the country, right? Right now we have images and their description in various dialectal variety of Indian languages. So we have a very rich data set where you can build an image describer, if I may call it, or descriptor, automated descriptor about it. So think of this, right? You go to a place, you tap a picture and you don't know about it, and you want in your language of your choice, right? You can now have a computer speak to it. Next, you can think of building many other applications like speech-to-speech translation. Think of someone in UP trying to speak someone in Kerala, right? Their languages are completely different. How do we build such solutions when each of them are speaking in their language of comfort, but at the end, they are listening to each other in the way as if somebody next door is speaking to them. So there is this plethora of solutions, technologies that are possible to develop with this data. Also, just as I'm thinking aloud, applications such as where you want to build, technology where the text will be read out to people. Probably you are handicapped, or it may be that you cannot read that language, the script of that, so the computer will be able to speak to you again from the text, right? So there is all these are the potential applications that we can build. Now, so far, after we have made the data available, there have been a good number of users who have showed interest and filled out the form for download. And I hope that in coming weeks and months, we'll be seeing inputs and feedback from them on the good and bads about this data and how it's being usable or useful to them in near future.
That's fascinating. Has phase 2 launched yet? Have you launched it yet?
Yes, we have just started. So we have a few hours already in hand.
Oh, amazing. All the best with that. As you were speaking, I was thinking that this idea of having the data set as an interface between the computers and the languages is also so good for like accessibility, because often, like you said, someone who can't see an image and has that image described to them in their language is so much better than what right now we have is only English and maybe European languages obviously have better documentation, history, etc. I had some other thoughts as you were speaking all these ideas, and I kind of blanked out. But like, there's so much to be done, and in India, I think the division between our languages creates so many gaps. Do you see yourself leading any of that, all of these uses, or you're focused on Nimhans, which also I want you to talk a little more about?
Can you elaborate your question a bit?
Yeah, I meant that there is a lot of gap in terms of speech to speech, speech steps, etc. And there are many sectors that this can be put to use. I come from the cultural space, for instance, and I know that maybe even a tool where I'm a Gujarati, okay? I'm going to give a hypothetical scenario. there's a Gujarati folktale, and maybe because my command on Gujarati is not that great, I would love it if that folktale was kind of read out to me in language. Maybe even I would have a system where I could automatically translate some parts that I don't understand, right? Like that kind of seamless interface. So in the cultural sector, there's a lot of application. In the health sector, there's a lot of applications. Do you see yourself kind of dabbling into these application level projects that will eventually, the data will lead to?
Yeah, good question again. So Inspire Lab that I lead at Electrical Engineering Department at IISc, we have, in terms of application verticals, we do work in two areas. One is the healthcare that I mentioned, another is the language learning. Think of someone learning English, and how do you really get rid of your mother tongue influence and become neutral in English, and so on and so forth, right? Now, both of these are applications where this will be useful, and I'd like to pursue them. But apart from these, as you mentioned about culture, and there will be many more. For example, it could be audiobook generation of all books of the country in all languages, right? Think of what wonderful technology that will be, right? And there are a whole lot of them. So I don't think I have the bandwidth to really go and do for all of them, but I would love to also do a few in these two major verticals to demonstrate the utility of this purpose. Apart from the ASR, which is speech to text, as well as the TTS, which is text to speech. These two, of course, is a core component of many of the technologies that we do.
Can you talk a little more about both these projects in the health and the language learning spaces that the labs is leading?
Sure. So on the health aspect, we are working with patients who are suffering from neurodegenerative diseases, such as Parkinson's, which is often known, and also amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is called ALS. And these diseases are neurodegenerative because once you are detected or diagnosed with this disease, you keep on deteriorating. You do not improve even with therapy. But for Parkinson's, we have I'll say, better longevity than ALS. Now, there are a number of aspects that we are looking at for these diseases. Number one, once patients with these diseases, or they get to know that they're suffering from these diseases, they actually, I'll say, mentally become so obsessed that they don't anymore come to hospitals, and they lose their therapy or treatment, right? So one key aspect that doctors have been always telling us, is there a way you can build some application which is useful in there or maybe available in phone, where these patients can speak to and get to know their status, right? So for many of these diseases, what happens, your voice is also compromised, because in these diseases, your muscle weakness becomes more prominent. And these muscles are the muscles that control your vocal apparatus. Then your speech becomes slurred, you won't be intelligible, you'll be, in a society, you will start becoming an outlier because you won't be able to communicate, right? And it's a big problem for these patients. So unless you come to doctor and get the right therapy, you won't improve. So that's one aspect that you're working on. Number two is to understand, first of all, whether a voice has such signature of these diseases, right? So suppose it's an application in a phone that where you speak and it tells that you may have a chance of getting this disease because we see some signs and symptoms of this disease. Number three, when you are detected with this disease and your voice is impaired, then how do we improve their communication? Can we take this voice and make it a normal sounding voice? That way they will be able to communicate better with people around, right? That's number three. And doing all of these in Indian languages. In fact, in this area of research, which we call dyserthic or dyserthic speech processing, such slurred and compromised speech are called dyserthic speech. We have very little technology and science known for this disease. So I think, and particularly this connected to the language. When you speak, you have to speak in your language. And how do we build technology that will cater to these people, but in various Indian languages is one of the, so that's on the health aspect. On the language learning aspect that we're working on in a project called English Vaani, where we are trying to develop tools where a person who is learning English can come and speak and would get to know the pronunciation quality and rating for his or her speech. So think of this way that you have been learning speech to get a job in a call center, which is very, very popular in Indian context. And in call center, when you talk to customers, they are not from India, they are from all over the world. So your voice has to be neutral accent. Meaning, if, for example, I'm a Bengali, all my English is highly Bengali accented. How do you really get rid of them? There are certain sounds spoken in certain way that causes this mother tongue influence to come in. So this technology that we have been building is to detect them, have expert voices to guide them and help them to correct in a self-interactive manner. In the sense, you'll have an application and you can talk to this application as if it is your teacher, right? So there are phrases, words, sentences that you can practice and improve. And this system will keep telling you that you're making mistakes. Instead of saying Prasanta, you spoke Prasanto. So O sound will become A, right? So that kind of corrections it can do. And there are various ways that we are giving feedback. One is called the sound level feedback. They're making a wrong sound. Stress level feedback. For example, if I say, why are you going there versus why are you going there, right? I gave stress in two different words and two different meanings. And we often make a wrong, we communicate the wrong meaning when you give a wrong stress. So identify and automatically they're giving a stress at a wrong location. Then number three, intonation. As you know, if I say I'm going to, you are going to market versus you're going to market, right? The wrong, I mean, different intonation carry different meaning. And more importantly, pause. When you speak, you need to give right pauses, right places. So these are the aspects that we are capturing when somebody is speaking and giving feedback. The goal is to really give a comprehensive pronunciation feedback for someone to improve in speaking English, right? Again, here, the mistakes that we typically make being native Indian are because of our own language. So if you understand these nuances of our own language, you'll be able to understand how they influence the English, right? And capture them and give the right feedback.
Is the reverse also possible? Say if someone wants to learn Audhi or Marathi, I'm just hypothesizing, will the same kind of, let's call it training modules, help in that? That's question number one. And second is on accents, right? Of course, there's a journey towards English and then there's a journey towards a mother language. For example, like in Google Maps, right? Like that's something that I often, or any maps or any kind of speech, computerized speech technology that I currently interact with, even voiceovers on Instagram, they're all in the Anglo-American, Anglophone accented English, right? Could that not be, if I'm in Rajasthan and I switch on a audio assistant for me, could that not accent be actually more Indian? So do you think there's also application and merit in thinking about that reverse journey of the speech, the accents, the speech patterns, etc.?
Yeah, good question. See, what you mentioned is a very important, relevant, but that is slightly different from what I'm talking about. So what I'm talking about is an Indian with L1 Indian languages. L1 is language one, is learning L2, which is English, right? Now, if my L1 is Bengali, I'm learning Awadhi. Of course, again, same problem will come. L1 influences while I speak L2. But what you mentioned is very, very important in many of the applications that when I want to hear in a language of my locality, I get a very foreign accented version of that. And that will be coming from already what I mentioned based on Vaani. It's called a multi-speaker, multilingual text-to-speech model, where you choose certain accent for a certain text to be spoken by a certain speaker. Means first. So Prakriti, although maybe native of Gujarat, but her voice with an Assamese tone will speak out a Assamese sentence. It could also be that Prakriti with an Assamese accent speaking a Hindi sentence, right? As if Prakriti is from Assam speaking a Hindi sentence. So these are all possible today. And I'm sure in next few years, we'll be seeing all these being deployed in such scenarios.
Absolutely. And I feel like that the natural extension then is these data sets also become ways to build. I don't have an engineering background, so excuse my slightly less jargony understanding. But large language models that generative AI then builds upon is right now not as diverse as I know it, it's mostly Anglo-American data sets, mostly data sets in English that get pulled into. And that's, I know I've read enough reports and research papers that says that also makes AI culturally unidimensional as it exists today. So I'm already seeing like an application of something like this once it's transcribed. So I think that challenge of transcription, could you throw a little more light on how much, if more of this was transcribed, how much more amplified its impact could be?
Yeah, I think that's the key question that many of us are trying to find an answer of. Think of this, right? So suppose you have spoken from a district, let's say Nagpur in Maharashtra. And this is my experience myself. I have experienced myself in lab. So that was in case of Telugu. So we had recordings from, let's say, Karimnagar. And then that's also Telugu. Along with, let's say, you take a person from Srikakulam, right? That's also Telugu, but these two Telugus are so different. So we had recordings from Karimnagar, and I had an intern from Srikakulam. So I asked that intern, why don't you go ahead and try to transcribe some of them? And when she listened to them, she said that, I can feel that it's Telugu, but I cannot understand it a bit. I cannot even type a single word of it, right? So when I heard that, I felt like, okay, this is a revelation that Telugu has so many colors. And there are two colors within Telugu that one doesn't understand, right? One color doesn't understand the other. So when we do this transcription, going back to Nagpur, we give instruction to these agencies that your transcriber should be within 20 kilometers radius from the location of the speaker. Because we believe the more you go away, it becomes not accurate transcription. For example, in Maithili, when there are, in Hindi, we say hai, right? That's a common word. But in Maithili, they speak hai. Now, if you're a Hindi person, you do not have any knowledge of Maithili, you'll be actually hearing hai. Although that person is keep on speaking hai, right? And that's natural as a human because you have only certain vocabulary space in your training set, I'll say your brain has been trained with. So you'll be always mapping to those, right? You make mistake. And this is what we've observed big time, that the transcriber gives a transcription which really doesn't match with what is spoken in audio. And that is only can be validated by a person who knows that dialect of audio very well, not someone who doesn't know it well, very far from that position, right? And this has been a big challenge and learning for me and the team here, that how do we validate transcriptions and make sure it's accurate. So we have realized, even as you know, suppose somebody says, I am going, in English, I'm saying, you can write going in many ways, right? You can write G-O-I-N-G, you can write G-O-I-N, you can write G-O single quote I-N. There are many, many ways to write. And in Indian context, we are about to put out a report of same word, how many different forms in a written form it can take, depending on who is writing it. Think of, in Bengali, I'm telling, we call it nebar, right? For example, I say, I went to bring that book. So I say, Ami boita nebar jonno jacchi, right? Now this nebar can be in two ways, spoken in two ways, nebar and newar, right? Now, if I'm used to speaking nebar, although I hear newar, I'll end up writing nebar. So, and this we have observed in a very large and good scale when we transcribed both in Respin as well as Vaani. And this is something we have documented and we want to put it out so that it's known to everybody in the community.
This is the typical, it can happen only in India kind of thing, where there is such granular differentiation. I know we have just a little bit more time, but I want to speak about scripts. Is that a layer, like the language scripts, standardized scripts for a lot of languages? Does that feature anywhere in this exercise, or is that in any way something that you all work with or plan to work with?
Currently, we are going with scripts, not necessarily, I'll say, often chosen by the people speaking that language. For example, Maithili has a Mithila script. but currently we are using Devanagari script to transcribe it. Right? So we have taken calls and certain aspects. There are various reasons. So if you go to a region and a district, depending on the age of the person you interact or want to get recordings from, you get different kind of speech. If you go to elderly, there'll be a mix of that authentic Maithili versus a Hindi and English. It's a mix because they're exposed to other, technologies, entertainment, and so whatsoever, right? So when you give them to transcribe, same thing happens. So we found that if you go with Mithila script, it will be more challenge in getting people who can type in Mithila. So we restricted ourselves to Devanagari script. And such a call has been taken. For example, in Marathi, same thing, we have used a Devanagari script, right? But I think we did not really change the script drastically. So they are, I'll say nearest neighbor script in a sense, right? But for Kannada, of course, we are using Kannada script. For Telugu, we are using Telugu script and so on and so forth. We plan to do so, but there is no specific, I'll say targeted research question that we have related to script.
Lovely. I just have final two that way I have many, but for the purpose of this conversation, I have two things. One is something I was also reading up more about your work, stuff you've spoken about. You on Project Vaani is spoken about responsible AI and ethical AI, I think, I'm not sure. But you've spoken about that a little in the past. So I wanted to understand just, so someone who's fairly in the space, maybe not directly, but in I would not say in the general community where these conversations may be a little more advanced than, say, when I have with my friends. Well, what is ethical AI? Why does it matter to how do you embed it in new technologies? That's like one question. And actually, that's it for the question.
So let me, this is an excellent question, and this has come again and again to me. So I always start with an example. So think of this, right? So we are, let's say, in the context of Vaani project, we are recording speech. Let's say we go to a district and record only male population. We had this problem in one of the districts in Chhattisgarh where we had difficulty. One agency told us they are finding it difficult to reach out to female population there because the female population was not allowed to come out of their house and give recordings. And we had difficulty in getting recordings done. So think of that we record only from male population in that district. Does it mean that the technology built on that data won't work on female population? Will there be a bias? Are you responsible for catering the technology to every individual? Right? That's one. Think of digital divide. There are many ways digital divide can happen. What about literate versus illiterate? Are you going to only go to people who can read and write? Then probably you'll go to people who are illiterate. Their accent and way of speaking will be different. Are you not building technology for them? Right. Now, in the Project Vaani, we are solving another digital divide where we're not just collecting standard languages, right? We're going to collect the variation of that language. That way, we'll have technology not just for standard Telugu. Also, we have variation for Karimnagar Telugu, we'll have variation Krishna Telugu, Srikakulam Telugu, and so on and so forth, right? That's another, right? So when we build technologies, we have to be aware of, because technology is just a program, right? It is fed with certain data. If your data is biased, if your data is skewed, your data is not ethically, balanced, let me put that, then your outcome also will be equally unbalanced. That is what is all about responsibility. There's a major part, there are other small aspects into it, but that is what it is. So when we build technology, it's not the algorithm, it's more about the input to it that we have to be very, very careful and thoughtful about. One classic example in one of the presentation I heard from Responsible AI is think of if we search in Google for judge or a lawyer, right? And go to image, you'll be finding predominantly it will be male faces that are coming up. Why? How do we really build such technology that doesn't happen?
Male and white. That's
male and white, yes, that's another, right? So
that's another layer.
It is the technology we are creating, right? It's not coming out of nowhere. So how do we make sure that this doesn't happen? And this is what will shape our brain when we grow as a kid, right? You search, you get a response, your brain gets reinforced with those responses. So how do we really not do that going forward?
I love that. As an anecdote, I studied something called MA in Digital Humanities, which was exactly this kind of research questions, right? That if your data set technology is built by humans who have biases and prejudices, right? Cultural, linguistic, gender. There's so many layers of racial, ethical, ethnographic, like ethnic wise, ethnic biases. And, uh, I kind of presented my paper and said the same thing, that this was in the subset of literature as it's represented online. Say you search for romantic books, you will only get books written by American writers and European writers. It will just not feature on Google very prominently unless someone from India or Africa or Korea has paid for it, right? Um, so like that is so fundamental. But do you also think there's, of course, that's one layer of ethics. Do you also think that there is any scope for discussion on ethical application of AI, not just building the data set?
Yeah, absolutely. So the application that you build is targeted to home. So, right. So think of this way, right? Today, let's say Zomato, right? It's a so they want to, let's say, enable their entire order through voice. Let's assume that. Uh, and when we think of this application, you know who are the users, who it will cater to, right? Uh, Now that's a very small scale application. Let's put it that way, right? Now you can think of now an application which is pan India. When we do that, right? Think of it is even where you let's say you want to pay your tax through voice, right? You say that from my bank this much amount should be paid, right? And you have to make sure that such an application really works for everybody. So an application when you launch, it has to cater to individual beyond any digital divide. Meaning we have to make sure, of course, when you build technology, it is robust. And when you think of application, we have to be coupled. It's a coupled problem. I think it's not just different. The application also has to be aware of this aspect in which we may fall into the trap of one place where it works, another place one gets deprived, another is not. So that we have to really think about all those aspects.
Absolutely. I think because you also, language in India, I think the first divide is language. English as this kind of aspirational space, a space where people don't always have the access to learn and get the command on English to become the target, to become the kind of user that is required to access most technology or most conversations online. So I really, really appreciate that. I think there's just so much, there's this collaborate with us button. I already have like 15 ways of applying it in the work we do at C3, and I'm quite excited to see what we can do with the data set itself, parts of the data set at the very least. Finally, personally for you, what's next? What's next for Vaani? What's next for you? And how do you see the next few years, in terms of what are the challenges you're immediately wanting to solve? How do you see kind of, this project and you with it progressing going ahead?
There are a large number of research questions that I'm at solving and answering, doing the required homework, research work. So first question is, think of taking Vaani forward. We're now collecting 200 hours in every district. Now, when we have collected, the first phase had 80 districts, second phase also we have 80 plus districts. When we collect these recordings from 160 plus districts, the next question is, have we really covered the skeleton of the languages of India, right? And when you go to a new district, do you really need to collect 200 hours or even less will be good? If it is less, how much? How do we answer that very quantitatively, right? That'll be first question. How many speakers do we really need? Is gender balance really matter? Because in some places it will be difficult to collect. So all those are questions for even collecting data that is. Second will be coming to these two applications that I have been working on, where both the application specific question that you have to answer with this, but the database foundation model will help. And also the core technologies such as ASR and TTS. How do we really enable them in these applications? So as I was telling, when we talk about enhancement of speech of an individual suffering from neurodegenerative diseases, think of using ASR and TTS, where ASR understands what's being spoken and the TTS speaks out in a natural way, right? And how do you really make them work in variety of languages of the demand of the patient, right? So these are some of the application layer as well as some of the questions that we need to answer for even the data collection layer. Both are needed. And in between, of course, we are building newer technologies where we go and change the algorithm itself to maybe make it faster, more real time, more memory efficient, right? Those are the layer in between. Think of an app which is way heavy than another app. You certainly would prefer a smaller app which will require less, consume less space in your device. So those are also solutions in between, right? So we also work in that space to the extent possible to see, particularly from the improvement of the performance. So today we have a technology. If we can say that if we have more data, even a simpler technology can give better solution, then we would like to develop them. So in these three layers, in the data collection, curation, technology development, and application, I'd like to spend next few years to work on.
I mean, sounds like a lifetime's worth of work to me. There's so many continuous problems to solve. Just a thought. I know I said that there was a last bit, but has this the health application been launched? Has it is it already being used with patients, etc.? Is it at the kind of development level right now?
No, we have already launched an application which is called Neuro Companion, which is available in Google Play. And the real challenge has been to really get it used by patients. And as I've been working, I realized that that's a different layer of problem, probably an academician is not good at, right? To really convince a patient that use it and let us see how it is useful to you. As I told you, these patients are particularly in NIMHANS, they come from a middle class family or even a lower class, right? And when they hear about this disease, it's like devastating for them. They don't want to think anything else. Even when we go and record from them, it's an experience. They don't want to, they're asking always, if I give you this, will you cure me? Right? It's kind of emotional at the same time, and also they know that they're going to die in a few years more than what otherwise they would have been, right? And so the question is, these patients, how do you really convince them to use such a technology? So we have been discussing with doctors, and we have been thinking of what is called gamification. And the gamification is where you don't tell them speak this. There's like a clinical exercise. We don't do that. Rather, we engage them in some games through which you get their voice. That'll be more engaging, right? So how do you do an user engagement? It's a completely different area of research which I'm not good at, right? So I think those set of people and experts has to come in on the table and really work together. And I've been really trying to do my best to do that, but it's been quite difficult. So we have built the application to answer your question, but have not been successful in deploying and getting return data point, the feedback from the patients.
Okay, I hope that the more we speak about it, more people are inspired to kind of work on this particular side of the use case. But this has been such a lovely conversation. Thank you so much. I really wish you all the best. I'm from academia, and I love when my heart lies in all the research questions that academia solves and the world then benefits from at scale. I really think all innovation begins in spaces like these, in projects like these, all kind of world-changing innovation. So I'm really rooting for Project Vaani, and I said this to you before, but if there's any way that we can help you, we're on board, here to contribute in whatever capacity we can as well. So thank you so much for doing this and for the time you've taken out.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, as I said, and I hope always that with your best wishes and people like you would like to take this forward and make it a real success. Thank you.